You are there on the ground. You were at Samsung's unveiling last week as well. Set the scene for us in Barcelona.
Well, as you said, Emily, I mean, they're talking about 5G like crazy. And there are actually quite a few phones that have been announced with 5G modems here at the show from about 6 or 7 different vendors. And of course, the big news is around the foldables. And, you've got both the Samsung Galaxy Fold and then this new Huawei Mate X. And very interesting devices. I mean, one folds in, one folds out. Physically, the designs are very different, but I tell you, the excitement level around foldables is tangible. People are ready for something new and different in the smartphone market, and they are very anxious to see these. Now, at the price points they're at, of course, they're not going to sell in huge volumes, but at least it sort of sets the tone for the future, and I think that's very interesting.
Anand, are you excited about foldable phones?
No.
Like Bob is?
No, I'm not. So very simply, no, I'm not. Look, from a corporate perspective and from a consumer perspective, I think the consumer is interested in about these new styles, these new options, new feature sets. But the value of these phones, or the average selling price of these phones, is going to make the market very, very small, as Bob has already mentioned. So one of the things that we want to understand is what makes the market bigger. 5G alone can't do it. 5G is not really here in 2019. 2020, perhaps we see more traction. Infrastructure has to be built first. New and additional features, move the market a little bit at the high end, but at the high end, the market is actually lengthening. The people are holding on to their phones for 3 years, even longer. And at the low end, some of the feature sets are creeping in, but it's not enough to offset the weakness in the high end. So all in all, I think the smartphone market is going to be lackluster. We think there's more downside to numbers from companies like IDC or even Gartner. And to be quite honest, that's one of the reasons I'm not at MWC this year.
Now, I want to talk about what people are saying about Huawei. We've got the UK, Germany, Canada, Japan, all considering the role of Huawei in their future networks. Bloomberg spoke to a number of different global mobile leaders at MWC, asked how they're feeling about Huawei. Of course, the contention is fears around their equipment being used for espionage, and the U.S. has pushed back on all of these countries to encourage them to ban Huawei equipment. Take a listen to what these executives at MWC are saying about Huawei.
We have to plan for every eventuality. Huawei are an important part of UK telecoms infrastructure, and any change to that, is something we'd have to deal with.
There is a lot of noise, and we really like to become very factual on that issue. For the time being, there is no proof of any wrongdoing in any part of our networks.
There are a handful of technology companies who are capable of supporting companies like us with technology. And so far, Huawei has been a trusted partner for us.
We need to avoid any further delay because it might be very damaging for Europe globally.
It sounds, Bob, from there that some of these European tech leaders are taking a less antagonistic stance towards Huawei. Is that a fair read?
I think that's absolutely a fair read, Emily. And, you have to remember a lot of the infrastructure, that equipment has been there for years, and it's very expensive to replace. You can't just rip all this stuff out. So any actions that would be taken towards Huawei are going to take several years realistically. And so there's that practical side of the question as well. But you're right. In generally speaking, here in Europe, there seems to be more willingness to accept them. Of course, their consumer products are sold here. They have decent market share here. Remember, Huawei is the #2 smartphone seller in the world. It's just they have zero presence in the U.S. So we tend to think of them very differently. But I would say in general, yes, there's a lot of focus on Huawei, a lot of discussion there. But, at the end of the day, I think there's going to have to be some serious security assessments that are done and people who are willing to accept what some of those answers come out to be.
Now, Anand, we were speaking with Miki Mikitani, who's the CEO of Rakuten, who's trying to build a whole new mobile network in Japan. He said he decided not to use Huawei equipment in that network because of concerns around espionage. That said, for the if it's already in existing networks or existing partners of some of these telecom providers, do you expect some of these European countries to simply stay the course, to not take the action of banning Huawei as the U.S. has done?
I agree with Bob's point that it's not as easy to rip and replace, but you do want to sort of mitigate the risk a little bit. And as you think through 5G and you think through the next 5 to 7 year cycle, you perhaps think through a more distributed strategy, and this is the time to do it. So in 2019 and 2020, as you lay the groundwork for a wide distributed infrastructure, companies who are large telco providers and perhaps have footprints in more than one country are going to think through, okay, do I want to put all my chips on one company, or do I take a more distributed approach relative to how I did things for 4G? Also, the landscape, the architecture of 5G itself may permit that sort of an architecture. So they're going to be more steady, more measured, and I would imagine the way the U.S. is leaning on some of its allies, perhaps they take a more a security mitigated approach, regardless of whether they're, the truth about Huawei comes to pass or not.